1858. The Queen crowned, India's treasures stolen. Imagine a year where a queen's power reaches its zenith, celebrated across an empire. But for another land, that same year marks a profound violation, a theft on an unimaginable scale. 1858. A year of glittering crowns and shadowed plunder. A year when Queen Victoria, ascending to the title of Empress of India, didn't just inherit a dominion, she inherited its soul, its history, its accumulated wealth. And much of that inheritance was, in fact, stolen. We often hear of the British Empire's civilizing mission, of bringing order and progress to the world. But let's peel back the velvet curtain of imperial narrative and expose the grim reality. 1858 wasn't just a turning point in the governance of India. It was a watershed moment in the systematic dismantling of its heritage, a deeply uncomfortable truth we must confront. The year 1858 is emblazoned in British history for a singular, momentous event, the Government of India Act. This act, passed on August 2nd, 1858, transferred the powers of the British East India Company directly to the British Crown. No longer was India ruled by a private trading corporation. It was now officially part of the British sovereign's domain. This was the crowning glory, the ultimate consolidation of power for Queen Victoria. But behind this grand pronouncement lay a brutal truth. The East India Company, for over 2 centuries, had been systematically extracting wealth and resources from India, acting as a de facto colonial ruler. When the Crown took over, it didn't inherit an empty house. It inherited a treasure trove, plundered and packed. Let's talk about the how. How did this happen? It wasn't a single dramatic heist. It was a slow, insidious process of economic exploitation, political manipulation, and outright theft, culminating in the direct appropriation of India's material and cultural wealth under Crown rule. The East India Company, initially chartered to trade spices and textiles, gradually transformed into a military and administrative power. They waged wars, signed unequal treaties, and imposed crippling taxes. They manipulated local economies, destroying indigenous industries to make way for British goods. Think of the Indian textile industry, once the envy of the world, systematically undermined by British manufactured cloth. This wasn't just trade, it was economic warfare. And then there were the treasures. India was a land of immense wealth, of exquisite craftsmanship, of centuries of artistic and spiritual heritage. Think of the Koh-i-Noor diamond, now a centerpiece of the British crown jewels. Its journey to Britain is a story steeped in conquest and coercion. While its acquisition predates 1858, its symbolic significance as a prize of empire, officially brought under crown ownership with the takeover, cannot be overstated. It's a stark reminder of what was taken. But it wasn't just about diamonds. It was about countless artifacts, sculptures, manuscripts, religious objects, and works of art. The British Museum in London, a repository of global artifacts, is a testament to this vast acquisition. Many of these items were not gifted or purchased through fair exchange. They were seized as war booty, taken as tribute, or simply acquired through dubious means. For example, after the Anglo-Mysore Wars, vast quantities of art and artifacts from Tipu Sultan's palace at Seringapatam were taken by the British. Imagine the opulence, the artistry, the historical significance of these items, now displayed thousands of miles away, far from their origins. The Government of India Act of 1858 was, in essence, a legal framework to legitimize this ongoing plunder. It transferred the assets, the revenues, and the accumulated wealth that the East India Company had amassed through its exploitative practices directly to the British Crown. It was a formalization of theft. The wealth that should have been used to develop India, to uplift its people, to preserve its heritage, was instead absorbed into the coffers of the British Empire, funding its expansion and enriching its elite. Let's consider the evidence, the documented accounts. Historians like William Dalrymple and Shashi Tharoor have meticulously detailed these historical injustices. Tharoor, in his book, An Era of Darkness lays bare the economic drain that British rule inflicted on India. He cites figures, estimates of the wealth extracted, showing a consistent outflow of capital from India to Britain. This wasn't a charitable endeavor. It was a colonial enterprise designed for profit, and that profit was built on the subjugation and impoverishment of India. The Act of 1858 also heralded a new era of direct rule, which only intensified the systematic appropriation of resources. The British saw India as a vast mine to be exploited. Minerals, agricultural produce, textiles, everything was extracted for the benefit of the empire. And when we talk about treasures, it's not just about precious metals and jewels. It's about the tangible manifestations of Indian culture, of its artistic genius, of its spiritual devotion. Imagine the thousands of ancient manuscripts, filled with millennia of knowledge, now housed in British libraries, their access often controlled, and their narratives interpreted through a colonial lens. Consider the Elgin marbles, or rather the Parthenon marbles. While not directly from India, their story echoes the same sentiment of cultural appropriation. These ancient Greek sculptures were removed from the Parthenon by Lord Elgin in the early 19th century, long before 1858, and are now a contentious exhibit in the British Museum. The principle is the same, the powerful taking the cultural heritage of another land, often through questionable means, and claiming ownership. The Indian context, however, is far broader, encompassing a far greater scale and duration of systematic extraction. The narrative of 1858 is one of a queen being crowned, yes, but it's also a narrative of a nation's heritage being systematically looted. The British often framed their presence as a benevolent act, bringing order, law, and modernity. But this progress came at an immeasurable cost to India's own development and cultural integrity. The treasures that were amassed were not simply curiosities. They were the physical embodiment of India's history, its artistry, its very identity. Their removal was a severing, a dismemberment of its cultural body. Think about the economic impact. The wealth extracted from India wasn't just a drain on its resources. It fueled the Industrial Revolution in Britain. It funded railways, factories, and infrastructure in Britain, while India was often left with a fractured economy, dependent on British imports, and lacking the very capital that was rightfully its own. This is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of historical record, supported by extensive documentation and academic research. The Government of India Act of 1858 was not just a change in administration. It was a formal declaration of proprietary rights over India's accumulated wealth and cultural heritage. It was the empire solidifying its claim, not as a protector, but as an owner. The treasures that were taken, the manuscripts, the sculptures, the jewelry, the religious artifacts, were the fruits of centuries of Indian labor, innovation, and artistic endeavor. They were not gifts, nor were they the spoils of a truly equitable partnership. They were the spoils of conquest and a systematic, enduring economic subjugation. The legacy of 1858 is not just in the history books, it's in the present day. Debates around the repatriation of artifacts, the acknowledgement of colonial injustices, and the economic disparities between former colonizing powers and their former colonies all have their roots in this era. When we look at the British crown jewels, or the vast collections in museums like the British Museum, we must ask ourselves, what is the true cost of this magnificence? How much of it was acquired through legitimate means, and how much represents the silent theft of another nation's patrimony? The year 1858 marks a pivotal moment. A queen ascended to a grand title, but at what price? The glittering crown of empire was forged not just in political maneuvering, but in the systematic appropriation of India's wealth and the plundering of its cultural treasures. This is not a story of gentle transition or benevolent guidance. It is a story of exploitation, of power wielded without conscience, and of a legacy of loss that continues to resonate. When we consider the grandeur of empire, we must also remember the profound cost to those from whom that grandeur was taken. The treasures that adorned the courts of Britain were, in large part, the stolen heart of India.